Soundologia. Soundologia. Soundologia.
Hello, dear listeners. Welcome to the Soundologia podcast, episode number 3. Soundologia is where we have conversations about sound, arts, and technology. If you are interested in modern and experimental music, various sounds, unique sound experiments, and different approaches to sound perceptions, this is the place for you. As always, I am your host, Pedja Kovačević, and I would like to welcome you to the Soundologia platform and our podcast series. There are not that many sound artists in the world that create sculptures out of sound. They do not use clay or a similar material that most sculptors and ceramicists use to work with as a primary material. They work with different materials, considering all necessary scientific results from various research and detailed studies of space, time, and natural occurring processes that produce sound. So even though sound is always at the heart of their studies, sound artists approach it from different angles, getting the final result similar to the one a real sculpture gets. Due to the use of light and all the effects that the space around the sound installation supplies, these sound artists tend to visualize sound and represent its visible elements. Today, I'm pleased to have the sound artist Alba Triana here at Soundologia, whose sound installations or sculptures are placed in museums worldwide. Her internationally featured artworks include sound and light sculptures, vibrational objects, and resonating spaces. These are hybrid pieces that cross the boundaries of a diverse set of fields. Alba Triana has received so many awards here in the United States as well as in Europe and Latin America. I will mention just a few, such as the Civitella Foundation Fellowship, Italy and United States, South Arts State Fellowship, United States, IDCT National Composition Contest, National Electroacoustic Music Contest, Otto de Graaf National Contest, and French Aliens Best Exhibition of the Year Award. In addition, she was recognized by some of the most prominent ensembles and music institutions who commissioned her work and provided residencies and grants. Some of them are Chronos Quartet, Pro Helvetia from Switzerland, American Composers Forum, All It Arts, and the Ministry of Culture from Colombia. Furthermore, Triana's work has been featured internationally in Paris, France, Barcelona, Spain, Colombia, Mexico, and so on. She has participated in festivals such as Futura Synthese France and Zilele Musicili Noi Moldova. Her work also belongs to art collections in Europe, Latin America, and United States, including the Otazu Collection 2020, Arco Prize for Collecting, as well as the Banco de la República de Colombia. Some of her sound installations found a place in the book Sensing Sound, Singing and Listening as Vibrational Practice by musicologist Nina San Aizheim. Hello, Alba. Good to hear at Soundologia. How are you?
Hello, Pedja, and thank you for having me.
Yeah, a lot of achievements, I see. It was a long reading, but there are impressive biography, a lot of work behind you.
Thank you.
You were a guest at the UCLA Peer Labs Pop-Up Lab series. Actually, I had a chance to watch the session and get familiar more with your work. And before we get started talking about your work, I would like you to tell us something about your background and development as an artist. You earned bachelor's degree in Colombia in music compositions and became a Fulbright scholar later. Then you received a double emphasis master's degree in composition, new media, and integrated media at California Institute of the Arts. You also continue your PhD studies at the University of California, San Diego for music composition. So really impressive educational background. And what was the critical moment for you to start working with sound installations that differ from the usual compositor's works and writing pieces for concert calls?
Well, as you're mentioning, I had an education in the music composition field. Actually, I started studying music since I was very little. But since I was little, I also had a very, an education in other art fields. Probably the center was music, but I was also, my parents really emphasized different forms of art and science and mathematics. So I started my career as a musical composer, basically because I was trained to be a composer. But I always felt the need to work in a more holistic, cross-disciplinary fashion. But it was difficult for me. I did some collaborations, I did some cross-disciplinary artworks, but at that time, my career as a composer was picking up. And I just continued to work mostly as a composer. And at some point, I had a personal event that prevented me from writing music. And during that period of time, I couldn't work. And since I couldn't work, I decided to hire an assistant. And I just decided to do things that I wanted to do that I couldn't do before because I didn't have the time to do it. And during this process, I really allowed myself to go as far as I wanted with my curiosity. And I realized that I had deep questions that sometimes I couldn't even articulate. And during that period, which I thought I wasn't working, gradually, in a very organic way, I realized that I actually was in a creative process and that a new body of work was emerging. So at some point, I just realized that I was producing a new body of work, and I just loved it. It was more authentic, and ever since, I continued to do that.
Your artistic philosophy relies on the exploration of the inherent intelligence of nature. How do you see the connection between sound and nature, and do you consider nature of sound as everything surrounding humans?
As I said before, when you asked me about how I transition from writing concert music to installation or sculptural artwork, during that period in which I was experimenting and when I thought I wasn't working, I realized that I had deep questions. But at that time, I couldn't articulate those questions. And then as I ran the experiments and as I realized that I was actually creating artwork, I started realizing that what I was doing like a deep observation of nature. I have been, ever since, I've been observing nature at a fundamental level. And when I say that I'm observing nature at a fundamental level, what I mean is that I'm working with materials that apply for everything. And one of those materials is vibration. Mm-hmm. Everything in the physical world can be reduced to a vibrational state. Everything vibrates. And sound is just a form of vibration. And so I realized that by exploring vibration, I'm basically exploring nature. I realized that I was interested in working with different forms of vibration. And later on, and maybe we can discuss about this when we talk about the pieces,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
I realized that music is in the objects, in the physical objects. That, for example, when I work in pieces like, for example, the Resonant Bodies series of works, I have realized that when I excite an object with energy, and when I listen how the object sounds, the whole history of music is inside the object. And for me, that has been mind-blowing. And that's something that I have found while working in the creation of my works. So, for example, in the pieces where I work with cymbals or with a string quartet, or with different types of objects, even everyday objects like the pool motor, you can hear that when the object vibrates, you hear melodies, you hear complex textures. So the whole history of music, of all geographies, all historical periods is inside the objects. And for me, that has been one of the things that I feel that I have, I don't know if the word is discover, but at least I have become more aware of through my creative practice. And so there is definitely a very intimate relationship between the fact that we compose music and how nature behaves at a micro level.
Right. That's why we have the difference between listening and hearing that you are talking about. That everything that surrounded us actually can produce some sound, but that we can hear. But if we can listen to it carefully, we can hear different elements, parameters that objects create.
Exactly. And that's something that, I would like to, for example, discuss about the piece that is now being shown at the Museum of Modern Art of Bogota in my solo show, because I'm having this piece that maybe we can discuss later, but even I'm bringing musicians to amplify the music that emerges from this object that I'm exciting with energy.
What is the period that you were talking about when you shifted from that concert settings to the installation format that started making the transition in your over?
When I started working as a composer, simultaneously I did some multidisciplinary performances, so pieces that involved different forms of art. But in year 2008, I started doing some interactive installations. And after that, I had a period of time in which I couldn't compose for a couple of years. But since 2010, I completely fully adopted installation format. And I have created some concert music pieces, but for example, the Chronos Quartet piece, I created because it was an important commission, but not because at that moment I was creating concert music.
Let's touch upon some artists, composers who inspired your work from the music world, but also maybe other arts. When we talked before the show about some composers, you mentioned Lemon Young and his piece Well-Tuned Piano, Yanis Xenakis' work, Alvi Luciero was also important person for you. So can you just say something about those artists? And I assume that they are approached frequency spectre and get that frequency spectre broaden, and their research also inspired your work.
Yes, for me, whenever I get asked what are the artists or composers that inspire my work, it's very difficult because it involves the whole history of music and not only Western music. For example, since I can go back. I don't know when, but composers like Machol, for example, Monteverdi, Bach, which I think it's one of the composers that really influenced my work because I think it's a more universal exploration. I'm very interested in doing a more universal exploration and other types of music that are not Western music. But talking specifically about these composers, especially, I think Yannis Xenakis has been extremely influential in my work. I find his work fascinating. I believe that Yannis Xenakis, being a composer, an architect, and a mathematician, had a fascinating, deep, extremely deep interest in the universe. We may see Xenakis only as an exploration of music, but I think when you really know his music, you know how deep he explores how the universe self-organizes, and his use of stochastic techniques are, for me, incredibly profound and fascinating. So I always have been very intrigued and interested in his work. And also there are other composers like Jacinto Chelsea, Albin Lucier, and Lamont Young, for example, who pioneered in the exploration of acoustics. And I'm very interested in those acoustic phenomena. Initially, actually, I was really influenced by them, and I started working with acoustic phenomena. And later on, I started realizing that for me, acoustic is a part of something that is actually bigger, and that's why I allowed myself to expand to other ways of interactions between different types of waves or waves and spaces, not only in what is heard, but perceived through other senses.
Exactly. Before we start speaking about music, tell me, what role does technology play in your creative process, and what role does science also play? How is the science important for your work?
For me, technology is a tool. I never, when I work in a piece, I never think in technological terms. It is not that I'm interested in a technique or a device, and then I start thinking about the work. My quest is an artistic quest. And then when I have a question or something that I really want to explore, the tools come later, the techniques come later. And I use whatever tools of techniques I require to explore my ideas. And sometimes I use state-of-the-art technologies, and sometimes I use obsolete technologies. It doesn't really matter. For example, in this show that I have right now, or my later artistic production, I've been working with electromagnetism, and I'm using coils and circuits, which are very old technologies, but it is not about the technologies, it's about the exploration. And in terms of the science is something that really informs my practice. And so I've worked a lot with scientists. Actually, since 2018, I've been supported by the Swiss government, by Pro Helvetia, which is the Swiss Arts Council. And I've had the opportunity to work closely with world-class scientists. But science is something that informs my practice as other disciplines, like, for example, philosophy or engineer or design. So I allowed whatever area of human knowledge to explore the project. Is the project what tells me what I need to do? It is not me making decisions. Is the work that tells me I need to do research about this scientific topic, or talk to an electronic engineer, or whatever interaction outside of the musical world, and I just go ahead and do it.
That's actually brings me to the next question to ask you. How do you tend to start a piece? Do you have a general approach to the artwork, or do you always make different first steps? You mentioned that you made some exploration at the beginning, research how to approach to the object. So what steps do you make usually?
Okay, there is something that is very important for me, that is not to keep repeating myself, or not to keep repeating something that others have been doing sometimes interestingly. So what I do is for me, it is very important to feel that when I'm doing work, I'm expanding something. I'm bringing something to the field. So, and I'm full of ideas. I have many, many, many ideas for my works. I keep a notebook with the ideas organized, classified by areas of research or areas of exploration. And then, I get commissions, I get projects. And when there is a project, or when there is not a project, I select what is the next exploration. But sometimes I cannot know exactly what I want to explore. I may have a more general idea. And once I have that idea, I start a process of research and experimentation. And sometimes I work at my studio with a team of people. And sometimes we fail. We run a bunch of experiments and we get nothing. That's fine. It's part of the process.
How do you feel when you fail?
I feel the same as if I didn't fail, because for me, I'm in love with the process. For me, being an artist is about, it's a process of exploration. So if I get nothing or if I get something, I'm getting this a deeper understanding of a bigger, I'm trying to understand or to explore something that is really big, that is very difficult for me to put into words. So when I know that this doesn't work, it's fine. Sometimes, for example, with one of the pieces that I finished this year, it takes me 10 years to be able to do what I wanted. So this year, I finished one piece that I started trying to do 10 years ago, but I did it 10 years later. That's completely fine. So I go through a period of experimentation, and at some point, I either find what I'm looking for, or I find something else that is fascinating. I know where to start. I don't know where I'm going to end. And when I find this material that I'm moved by it, that I'm fascinated by it, then I start a creative process. And my creative processes are very, very long. I'm talking about just the creative aspect. Usually I work in a piece 4 hours a day, 4 to 5 hours a day. And sometimes it can take me a full year, 1 year and a half, 5 months. But usually the processes, especially when I need to develop pieces that unfold in time, the process is very long. When I have pieces that unfold in time, but it's not like a composition in time, sometimes the process is faster. But as I said before, I really respect my works, and I really allow the work to tell me what it needs. So I finish the work when the work is finished, not because I have a deadline or anything like that. I just allowed myself to work, and there is one day that I know this is finished. If I feel that the work is not finished, I keep working.
Right.
And I have to say something else, that I feel that the whole creative process of a piece also, it is completed when I have it interacting with the public. So there's also a very important aspect, which is showing the pieces, installing the pieces correctly, presented the pieces with the best conditions that I can. And now I'm really focusing on getting the best documentation, because now with the social media and all the digital platforms, I have realized that the works exist mostly in their documentation. Just a small audience can see the works in person because, people cannot travel. Not everybody can travel. So for me, that's the full creative process when the pieces exist and are presented to the public.
Before we jump into your sound installations, let's speak about the city where you and I live. That's Miami. And given that in this podcast season, I interview artists who live and create here in Miami, I always ask them to share their opinion on Miami's cultural scene and talk about opportunities experimental artists may have here. Do you feel this city is a complex and demanding place to be an independent artist? And what kind of opportunities does Miami offer to experimental artists?
Yes, I think it's very complex. Miami is a very nice city. I love it. I think it's beautiful. But I moved to Miami for personal reasons. I didn't move to Miami for professional reasons. And the experimental art scene is very small, especially, for example, experimental music or sound art is an extremely small community. We can count, I can invite my colleagues to a party and it's maybe 20 people or something like that. So that is very challenging. It's interesting that Miami is a city that is developing very fast. And especially the visual arts, there are a lot of opportunity for visual artists, but those opportunities are very related to the history of visual arts in the United States. So there is a very formed understanding of what creating art is. And there are very clear trends with a very clear explorations. So for example, for an artist like me who doesn't follow trends, because I don't follow trends, I try to create my own trend. It is difficult because curators and artists are very much in sync on what exploration, what being an artist or being even a musician, or even, for example, in Miami, the experimental sound is scene, which is small. There is an understanding among my colleagues what that may mean, but I don't even do that. So I feel that I'm alternative inside the alternative. So yes, it's challenging.
Yeah, it's challenging. Totally agree. It's unbelievable how this city is big, but you're absolutely right that community is really small. And what I can add, because I already have almost a full list of my upcoming guests and the guests that I had the chance to speak before and record a show to make episodes. Each of them does unique work. And that is something that fascinates me. Everybody finds their unique place to experiment, even because there are so many challenges here. And what is interesting also that most of artists have some place or home countries that they nurture the connection with, keeping the traditions, arts, like you. So you are originally from Colombia, which is apparent in your work and installations, and have had so many exhibitions there. You have mentioned the connection with your home country even after moving to the United States. How essential is it for you as an artist to keep the relation with your home country?
I've kept a very strong relationship with my country, basically because here I get very nice opportunities. I select my opportunities to show my work when I can do a good job. I like when I get the conditions to do a good job. So here I get that. And also I feel that Bogota, which is the capital, is a huge city, around 10 million people. It's this type of city, Latin American capital, that is dystopic and extremely interesting and extremely active, where culture is taken very, very seriously. And actually here there is a big experimental music, contemporary music, and sound art community. So of course, I love my country, but I also enjoy this activity, and interactions and different trends. So there are people doing fascinating operas, following more European tradition. For example, a couple of weeks ago, there was a fascinating project from a fellow composer, but there are other people following other trends, like more the John Cage line of exploration, and other people doing new things. There are many sound artists, young composers in the same city. There are, the last time I heard of these 13 music composition programs, and I'm not counting the sound art programs in the visual art departments at different universities. So I feel that there is a lot of activity, a lot of exchange of ideas, and I really enjoy that.
Was any of your works inspired by your immigration to the United States, maybe?
I'm not sure. I usually have questions that are more universal. I'm not usually exploring social issues, although I feel that exploring these more universal issues are related to the society, even though at first you may think that they are not. And of course, being an immigrant, probably I could say that when I studied here in Colombia, many of the artists from Latin America that go to more developed countries to study, they end up following the trend that they find in these countries. So a lot of composers who go to France, they are exploring French spectralism. Composers who go to the United States, they work in the John Cage Fluxus tradition. Or if they go to Germany, they follow the Lachemann's influence. But something that I really wanted to do ever since I came to the US is that I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to incorporate my exploration to, I just don't feel that it belongs to me. And I just allowed myself to do whatever I feel that I need to explore, but I don't like to explore what others are already exploring or have already explored. So I prefer just to do my own thing.
And when we speak about your originality, what can you say when you compare the reception that your exploration and installations receive in Colombia to the receptions you receive here in the United States and worldwide, in Italy, Switzerland, Moldova?
It really depends. I feel that here in Latin America, my work is very well received. In Europe too, when I go to Europe, there is a very serious experimentation, and in some European countries, they are used to being rigorous, and I consider myself a rigorous person. So I get nice projects actually in Europe, but also in the US right now. I cannot say because I have been asked to keep the major projects that I'm working on confidential by the museums I'm working with. But I feel that depending on the city, it can be a very good reception or more superficial depending on the area. And it varies a lot in the United States because in the US, not in every city, there is like an interest for what we do. It's not very spread as in other cities where they are very used to that. But in general, I feel that my work is received very nicely when I present. I have to say that.
Some of your music works from 10 and 20 years ago include compositions written for solo instruments. For example, the piece Antifa from 2010 explores the resonance potential of the cello instrument. Contrary expressive features, non-discernible materials in contrast with clearly identifiable ones, and different harmonic and colors palettes that you explored in that piece. Was it solely an evolution of your work if we compare Antifona for violoncello from 2000 with the Resonant Bodies series, Music for Four Resonators from 2016?
Yes, I think that is very interesting. Antifona is a piece from the 2000s, year 2000. And at that time, I was still a student at CalArts. I was doing my master's. And I was very interested in the resonating properties of the instrument. So when I composed the piece, the musician, the cellist, excites the instrument either with the bow or with the pizzicatos or with his hands. But I was very interested in composing the music during the resonance of the instrument. And today, I am extremely interested in the resonating properties of musical instruments or other objects and the resonating properties of objects and matter. So I feel that in a way that when I composed Antifona, those interests were emerging, and I wasn't so aware of what they were at that time. But with time, I started shaping them. And right now, I feel that I have a very clear understanding of what my quest is.
We came to the first piece that is Music for Four Resonators from 2016, the commission by Chronos Quartet. So we can actually hear the sound and after that talk about it. Let us know more about the series of works called Resonant Bodies. What stands behind it?
So the Resonating Bodies series of works explore the notion that at a micro level, everything in the physical body, in the physical world, vibrates. Where you are, where the listeners are, everywhere, things are constantly vibrating. Even if we perceive our table as solid, it is internally active. There is a vitality of matter, and everything is internally active. So in these works, what I do is that I usually use a musical instrument, although right now I'm working with regular objects too. And I excite those instruments with energy. And I excite them with energy to activate their resonant modes. The resonant modes are their intrinsic and natural vibrations, the modes in which the object naturally vibrates. And when I get to hear those vibrations that are intrinsic to the object, I explore all the ways in which the object resonates. And then with those natural vibrations, I create a composition in time and in space. Usually in space. The Chronos Quartet piece, it was a concert piece, but the other pieces that I have created in this series are also installations. So that is the basic idea of this series of works.
The series is quite interesting because you problematized a couple of elements: the sound of the resonator, the multi-voice sound of an instrument, secret sound and frequencies that the mic and transducer can pick up. How do you, I saw the pictures of when the Chronos Quartet, artists from Chronos Quartet perform. I didn't hear and I didn't see their recordings, but there is a video on YouTube with you performing the piece. How do you allow a performer to exploit the potential of the instrument's fundamental resonance modes and properties? And maybe I can ask you, where is the space or room for improvisation?
I am the one who does the experimentation and the exploration, and then I give the pre-digested materials to the performer. And as I said before, I did this concert piece music for the Chronos Quartet, but the other pieces are installations where I am the one who are making the decisions about the work. I'm very interested regarding the improvisation that you're asking. I'm very interested in how nature self-organizes. I'm very interested in chance and I'm in randomness, but I'm a little bit like Xenakis. I don't see improvisation really related to chance, how randomness operates in the natural world. For me, improvisation is more related, as the Xenakis used to say, to being spontaneous. So for example, in Music for Four Resonators, which is the piece for the Chronos Quartet, it is impossible for me to write a composition, to create a composition, because the instruments behave differently depending on the atmospheric conditions. So they don't resonate the same at different times of the day, or if they are already activated, they resonate differently than if they are just started being activated.
One of generated works that you mentioned is for sure sounding score, I would say.
Yes.
That we will not speak about today, but all listeners can find this piece and all other pieces on your website, albatriana.com, that is posted in the description of this episode. And when you're talking about the score, what is the score like for this series?
I actually like very much the traditional score, even though my scores, when people see them, they think that they don't look like a traditional score. The structure or the way they function, I find that useful for me. So even for the installations, for all the pieces that unfold in time, I keep, for example, the timeline, the evolution in time. I keep measures, I keep sections and double bars or bars to identify where the sections are. And for example, in the piece for the Chronos Quartet, I used symbols because I needed to describe to them with actions what they needed to do. And also there were things that were described with words, but I kept the timeline, like the time writing, or in the score. And I also used videos. Maybe people who have seen excerpts of this work have seen me performing, and these were the videos that I used to show them what they had to do. And so, for example, in a piece like this, where it wasn't an improvisation for them, I wanted to give them a guided improvisation. I used the score, I used the videos, and we also met in person. We had to travel to San Francisco, and then we met here in Bogota to practice, because for them it was like a little bit like learning how to play a new instrument, because they never used their bows, or they almost never touch the instruments, because they are mostly activating the instruments to hear the acoustic space and the resonating properties of the objects, of the instruments. And in other pieces from the Resonant Bodies series, where I have used cymbals, right now I'm doing the third cymbal piece, I keep the score, the timeline, and I just record in time the wave properties that I'm manipulating.
Right. The last question regarding resonant bodies. So when we watch the video you created and listen to the sound, you have the mic in your hand and transducer, if I'm correct, right? You're using both transducer and mic at the same time. So it provides you like the plenty of sounds and frequencies to pick up at the same time. Do you use any effects like to get reverb or delay?
Nothing. My work is not about simulating the natural world. I don't want to ornament anything. When I did that piece, I rented a string. I was in Miami actually, and I rented one string quartet, a different string quartet a week. So for 6 months, I was exploring a different set of instruments each week before doing the composition. And what I wanted to do, or how I wanted the system to work, was to actually hear the resonating properties of the object. I tried to keep the signal as clean as possible, because my interest is in revealing what is inside the resonators, what is inside the instrument. So with the cymbals, for example, I'm always asked, now that I have the exhibition at the museum, what is the music that you're playing? And I always say, no, I'm not playing any music. It is the cymbal. Or if it is the violin, I'm interested in hearing its resonating properties. And after testing several string quartet tests in a very methodic way, like a scientist, I recorded in paper, in the computer, not in paper, but, like in a chart, the different behaviors of the violins or the viola or the cello. I studied a lot about how builders, the luthiers, build the instrument. And then I think I got a very good understanding of how those instruments work in terms of their resonating properties. And for me, those things are always fascinating. For example, I realized that the violins usually have emphasized resonant modes that tend to be major, like a major mode, whereas the cello emphasize a minor mode. So after testing many cellos and many violins and many violas, then I understood, that's why when we hear a cello playing, we feel this melancholic character. Even if a violin and the cello play the same melody, we are going to hear a different character. And a character is embedded in the resonating properties of the instrument, which and that I found fascinating. For example, the viola had a different type of resonating properties, and that those resonating properties are responsible for the character of the music that is being played. I don't know if what I'm discovered is important or not, but when I find it, for me or when I experienced it, for me is, you cannot imagine what is my process of working at my studio is. I'm in a constant state of awe, fascinated by what I experience and what I find when I'm doing these pieces.
Great. From strings, instruments, violin, cello that you explored, we are moving to vibrational structure of cymbal that is actually the percussion metal instrument and the sound installation called microcosmos. And this is really the real sculpture and one of my favorite projects that we are discussing today. That is the vibrational sculpture where energy is used to explore a fundamental notion. All physical bodies are perpetually vibrating even when they appear to be perfectly still. These pieces, because of this drone and circulating movement and dramaturgy that the cymbal creates by itself, can be achieved only if you have the good loudspeakers, loud system at home, or using good headphones. Before we hear the project, please explain me the process of creating this installation. How did you get the vibration? At what primary source triggered the cymbal to vibrate?
Yes, so in this piece, there is a cymbal which is at the center of a space, and I'm activating the cymbal with energy. And basically, what happens is that the cymbal starts resonating naturally. Nobody touches the cymbal. For me, it is not about imposing some rhythms to the instrument, but as I said before, about revealing what exists inside the instrument. And of course, there were many challenges when creating this piece. I had to do a lot of experimentation until I was able to truly excite the instrument. And I discovered, for example, that, and this happens with all these pieces, that there is a bunch of sonic material. There is a huge, that is why it is called microcosmos, because there is a huge sonic world inside each object. But of course, I want to do a coherent piece. So I just use, let's say, one or two modes. I cannot use everything because I don't want to just be all over the place. And there are challenges because it's difficult to deal with the public. It's difficult because everybody, when they see that the cymbal is resonating, everybody wants to touch the cymbal and to hold it and to see if it is true that it is the instrument that is resonating. The objects interact with the environment, especially, the second cymbal piece that I'm showing right now is very sensitive to the atmospheric conditions. So that is challenging, and that presents stability issues for an exhibition that is going to be up for 5 months. And also I had to really explore what is the sonic microcosmos inside the instruments. And in all these instruments, I have found traditional melodies that could belong to any geographical area, to any historical period, with tuning changes depending on the atmospheric conditions. But that has been mind-blowing. And I can even find contemporary music. I have an anecdote. When I was creating a microcosmos, one day I was in my studio in Miami working with the cymbal, and my husband, who is also a composer, came to the room and asked me, "This sounds like Chelsea." And I said, "No, this is not Chelsea. This is the cymbal. Chelsea is also in the objects." And the more I work, I realized that the music is really in the objects. And maybe later on we can speak a little bit more about this, and why now I'm adding these sound interventions to the installation, because that's something that I'm doing right now, is that other people amplify the music that they are hearing inside the instrument.
The cymbal creates a drone sound that progresses over time, becoming a very complex sound at the end. So how do you stop the sound of cymbal? What actually makes cymbal to end?
There are two things. First, the composition repeats as a loop. So it is composed in a way that it is like a circular form. So it evolves, it gets very excited, and then it goes back gradually, and that is achieved compositionally. It goes back to the beginning, and it naturally loops. So the sound doesn't stop. But let's say when the exhibition comes to an end, at the end of the day, I just stop sending energy, and it stops vibrating, and then you see the cymbal, but without those amplified vibrations. You just see a cymbal. But when I send the energy, when I activate the cymbal with energy, it starts resonating, and you start seeing how it moves, and you start hearing those vibrations.
When we talk about microcosmos, I have to look over your other piece called Harmonic Motion, or Movimiento Armónico in Spanish. It's quite provocative work, as some atmospheric condition and position of the sun have some consequences, repercussions, and effects on your installation. So please tell us some differences between microcosmos and harmonic motion, and what those type of atmospheric and environmental condition affects your work and installation within the museum space.
Yes, it was about harmonic motion, which is the next symbol piece, which is being shown right now at the Museum of Modern Art of Bogota. In that work, I developed a technique that allowed me not only to hear the resonant modes, which I had already done in Music for Four Resonators and Microcosmos, but also to see those vibrations. And what was very sensitive, I'm using lasers to see the vibrations of the cymbal. Mm-hmm. I'm using a technique with lasers. And what happened at the studio right before, 3 weeks before the opening of the show, is that every morning we got to the studio and all the lasers had moved. And we couldn't understand why. And I was, of course, stressed out because I needed the piece to be stable at the museum. And then we realized that when the temperature goes up, the ceiling in my studio expands and the lasers are installed in the ceiling. And when the temperature goes down, it contracts. And the lasers, since I'm working in a millimetric way, I need the laser to be pointing to a very specific point in the cymbal. If it moves 3 millimeters or 4 millimeters, everything gets lost. So we realized that even if with those expansions of the materials like the ceiling, it could create big changes in how the piece looks. But this was more related to the visual manifestation of the vibrations. But for example, in the Chronos Quartet piece, the string quartet instruments were extremely sensitive to the temperature or humidity. So let's say that I knew that this instrument main mode was X frequency, but if it got too cold, let's say the frequency could move a quarter of a tone, or it could move a lot, or even I could stop hearing a tone that I knew that it is there when it is excited. So things can vary greatly.
The third project or the third installation is interactive musical instrument, electronic gamelan from 2008, interactive musical instrument which allows the public to transform the timbre sound quality of a musical piece, sliding the shadows of their hands over a light emitting table. Very interesting. There is a video on YouTube. I love really the gamelan instrument, and that sounds is always inspiring to hear. And it's great that you, Alba, was inspired also by that traditional Asian instrument to use as a model and generate through Max for Life. Actually, not Max for Life, Max MSP software. Although electronic gamelan is the project you created in 2008, I think we should mention it here. How did you start creating these pieces? Did the idea come from your experiences immersing yourself in Max MSP software?
Well, as I said before, for me, the process never starts from a technological tool. I was very interested, actually, that was my first installation. And at that time, I was very interested in exploring a different type of musical experience that was not a concert. And one of the things that I was interested in is related to what I told you before, is that I find the process, the creative process, fascinating. And I feel that the public usually has access to a result, which, the public usually has a more passive role. But when we perform music or when we create music, it's a kind of different type of musical experience, engaging the creativity and feeling the musicality, for example. It's a completely different type of experience. So I wanted to provide some of that to the public, but I wanted to create a piece. I'm a composer, I'm an artist. I needed the piece to stand by itself, even if the public is intervening the work. So I wanted to make sure that the piece sounds good with all endless, infinite possibilities of actions that the public can decide to make. But I wanted them to engage their creativity and their musicality and their intuition. So what I did is that I composed a musical piece. There is a table in the middle of the space, and there is like an orchestra of 9 speakers surrounding the instrument. I wanted the installation to be like a sort of resonant box. I wanted the public to feel that they are inside an instrument, like when you are inside of the resonant box of a piano. So the public, as they slide the shadows of the hands, something that is a very simple actions over a light emitting stripes, they transform the timbral color of the composition. Actually, more like it's like a sort of orchestration of the piece. They could manipulate that. And my work as a composer was to make sure that the piece could stand the infinite possibilities, and the public could had control over that. And this piece has a very detailed exploration of the space in terms of how sound moves throughout the 9 speakers. So I feel that this being my first installation work, it already shows things that later on became very important for me. Like, for example, space, which in my last work, Harmonic Motion, was explored extremely in a very detailed way. I really took space seriously in the current exhibition. And right now I'm really focusing on working in the space-time dimension without making any of those dimensions separate, but to understand them as one dimension. So in electronic gamelan, I started follow that path.
I actually wanted to ask you, why did you choose 9 speakers to set in the museum space? Was it intentional, or not?
Yes, it was intentional. I wanted to create like an orchestra. I use the word orchestra because inside the 9 speakers, I'm dividing the speakers as an orchestra. When you're orchestrating a piece, you have things that a musician call choirs. So, for example, if you are composing for orchestra, you may decide that you're going to use the string section or a string quartet inside the orchestra that you are treating kind of independently inside of the composition. So here, the 9 speakers operate as a whole, but also there are choirs, and there are 3 choirs, 3 speakers on the left, 3 speakers on the right, and 3 speakers on the back, which simultaneously they are working together, but they are working inside as a group.
Are they divided by frequency spectrum or not?
No, they are mostly divided by timbre and by the behavior of the spatialization. So, for example, as you may know, or I don't know if the listeners know, in the gamelan, they use this technique that is called hocketing. Hocketing means that a musical line, it is not played fully by one musician, but it is distributed among the different musicians, which I feel that in gamelan and also in the African hockets is a very interesting exploration of spatialization of sound played by musicians. So I was fascinated by the idea of the hocket, and I really wanted to explore that, inspired by the gamelan, explore that in the piece. So the sound is like a motor rhythm. There are individual tones that are being played constantly, and they move around the space. So each tone, every time the tone is sounds, it is played in a different speaker, and usually they run trajectories. Listeners won't be able to perceive this in the recording. You had to be in the space to perceive that. But for example, the whole orchestra, sometimes the trajectory, the sound goes around hockets. It's hocketing around the visitor or the audience who are at the center. It is going around, and sometimes they are going around inside the choirs, inside just these 3 speakers or these other 3 speakers, and then all of them communicate. So there is an extremely detailed treatment of the spatialization of sound in that work. And as I said before, we identify the choirs, like in an orchestra, also by timbre. So each choir has an identity in terms of timbre. But unfortunately, that is not perceived in the stereo recording that listeners will have available.
What do you do with your installations after the exhibitions, like Electro Gamelan? Are they still there, available to be seen, to be checked, to be tested?
Yes, the thing with these installations is that these works exist when they are installed. Otherwise, they are in my physical archive, in my studio. And some of these pieces have smaller versions that collectors buy, especially, for example, the pendulums or the needles. There are smaller versions that are at somebody's home or at an institution. So they exist somewhere, but the big installation exists when it's being exhibited.
Okay. Let me ask you the last question in this episode, in this conversation. To what extent does your work rely on grants and other sources?
I don't apply to grants. I am lucky that I get invited and that I get paid most of the time, 80%, 90% of the time, except for example, when I do shows in Miami, I get paid for the production of the pieces. I get my artist fees, and I get to sell work. So currently, my studio supports itself with this type of, because I get paid and because the pieces are sold. And I don't have time to apply to grants, but I would like to do that. But I don't like to spend most of the time writing. I prefer to spend most of my time actually creating artwork.
Sure. We have come to the end of today's show. Thank you all so much for tuning in. You have been listening to the conversation with Miami-based sound artist Alba Triana. Her work has shaped the Miami art scene, but also Colombian's scene and other places around the world, and influenced many other artists around the United States and abroad. Thank you, Alba. Thank you for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
My listeners got a broad sense of what sound installations, sound sculptures are like. We will definitely continue following your work. Also, for more information about Alba Triana and her sound installations, check all the links in the description. To find more about Soundologia, hear more about our guests, and listen to our previous shows, please visit us at soundologia.com. Also, do not forget to like our Facebook page and follow us on Instagram. I'm your host, Pedja Kovačević, and if you have any comments or recommendations, do not hesitate to write to us.